Okay, so we're into the Adductor Magnus bridge. Now the Adductor Magnus is one of several of the adductor muscles. The word Magnus implies what it is, which is quite a big one, quite an important one. It's worth stating though that you can never use any muscle in isolation. We kind of covered that in the previous exercise, thinking about those myofascial subsystems. But it certainly is the kind of chief driver of this movement. But there's different ways to approach this one, and it's different to a shoulder bridge, which would probably bias more the hamstring muscles, although this exercise, of course, uses the hamstring muscle as well, because, as I just said, you can't use any muscle in isolation. But it's just a way of changing the pitch of a classical Pilates modified shoulder bridge, and then getting more activation and facilitation of desired muscles. So I've got a stool just here. We'll move on to the progression with the Swiss ball later, but for now, having something fixed, whether it's a stool, side of a couch, small plinth, whatever it might be, is important. I've also got a soft ball here because this will come in between the knees. Now you can, as I've said before with soft balls, if you don't have one, you can use something similar with a block, roll up ball of socks or something, or a toilet roll, anything you can just get a little bit of adductor squeeze for the legs. So you want to come down into a position where you can get your feet up onto whatever you've got. Now I'm going to go heels on this one. You can go soles of the feet, but sometimes you might end up pushing too much against what you're lifting on. And what we're trying to do is kind of hook down into the object that we're on top of with the legs. At this point, place the ball, or whatever it is, between your knees and activate a little squeeze onto that. Now by squeezing in, we're facilitating hip adduction, the knees coming together, and you want to make sure that the feet and knees and hips are pretty much all the same width apart here. Hands are on the floor, and with the bridging movements, I think a preemptive lift, a preemptive tensioning of the things involved is helpful. So we've got the heels pressing down into the stool, we've got the ball being squeezed by the knees, that immediately wakes up the leg muscles. The hands and shoulders, it's important to think about those too, because we don't want to do this in a rounded shoulder position. Press the hands down into the floor and then simultaneously roll the shoulder tips down as well. So by doing that, I kind of feel like the first bit of the lift is going to be fairly easy. I just float up. But the moment you float up, you feel that inner compartment of the thigh, as well as the hamstrings, working. But you feel that adductor magnus really kick in. So now we come up and trying to stay level, we squeeze the glutes at the top. And ideally, you're going to have a relatively straight line from the knees running down to the rib cage. And then we drop down. So doing lifting movements like this, you've got the preemptive lift, but you're trying to smoothly lift up and smoothly lower down. But because you're just on the heels, you might find there's a little bit of wobbling happening. Now, if there's too much wobbling, simply take the hands wider away from you, and that's going to give you more rotational support. Just to improve the quality of the movement, really. So when you're doing this bridging movement, it's different to the classic bridge with the feet on the floor, so there's more of your body above your head. So it's unlikely that anybody who's partaking in a running program is going to be of this inclination, but if you feel like you're getting a lot of pressure, increase in intracranial pressure or intrathoracic pressure, and it just makes you feel not particularly pleasant, then this is not for you. You don't want to take too much of your body above your heart or your head if you're feeling any of that stuff. Anyway, I don't think the majority of people who are runners are going to have that problem, but it's worth just pointing that out. So we've got the basic shoulder bridge established here. What's important with this one as well is that as you're coming up and down, that your pelvis remains level and that you're not dropping off to one side. Now the squeeze on the ball and the press down into the bench, into the stool, should negate that, but still you've just got to be mindful that you're looking for equity in your pelvis while you're going through the lift. So there's the first level, if you like, of the Adductor Magnus bridge. I'll just show you the variation now with the Swiss ball. The Swiss ball variation provides multiple opportunities to challenge ourselves further. Of course, we're using a ball, so therefore there's the instability involved, but we can also get some dynamic movement into play as well. Now the setup is pretty much as we were. We come down and place the ball between our knees, but this time you might be able to get your feet flat on the ball rather than having the heels directly on top. So I think the slight modification here is the angle of the feet. Now, because this will challenge us quite a lot, certainly a lot more than the static bench or stool, have your hands quite wide when you attempt this. I should have said in the previous one, although I think it comes without saying really, that your spine should be in a neutral position. That little arch underneath the base of the spine, and maintain that throughout. Now when it comes into the Swiss ball, you've got the same preemptive squeeze with the knees and pressing down into the ball and pressing down into the floor with the hands and shoulders. You're coming up and just kind of getting used to the thing really. You're going to feel all the leg muscles working much harder, and your aim is to stop this happening. Okay, we don't want any unwanted movement in the Swiss ball. Remembering that kind of standard idea that if there's any movement in the ball, it denotes weakness. Now it's very difficult to hold it completely static, of course, but you know, the less the better. So because you're adding in these different elements of proprioception and balance and strength, try not to forget the fundamentals. Keep the ball squeezed, keep the preemptive squeeze going with the hands and shoulders, float up as if you're being lifted by water, make sure there's no lack of quality, we don't want any bouncing or too much lack of control of the ball. So there's the secondary progression. It's super important for runners to focus on bulletproofing their hamstrings, and there's multiple ways you can do that, but in the context of this one, I think it offers a really nice strategy because we've got this forced closure in play with the anterior oblique sling, the knee squeeze, the hands are pressing down to support, we've got a little bit more control in this one. So when you come up into your Adductor Magnus bridge, start off with a small movement, but see if you can roll the ball away from you and then come back. Now, that's the basic exercise. You can, over the course of several attempts, instilling confidence into the body, you can try and get out into something approaching a kind of full reverse plank and then coming back. You could do that singularly, you could do reps. It's a really nice, challenging exercise, and you can feel that it really working that adductor component as well as the hamstrings at the same time. So it's that posterior line is getting a really good bulletproofing with this type of exercise. Quality though is super important. You don't want any clunking in your knee, you don't want any feeling of excessive strain, you don't want to be feeling like you're about to spasm or twinge or pull your posterior chain of the thigh. So this is why it's a super important kind of element of any exercise, the notion of quality of movement. Now if you are looking to really up the ante, you can try doing your Adductor Magnus bridge without the hands on the floor. Now without the hands on the floor, you're going to find that it requires reasonably good core stability to get up and to keep that ball still. It's going to want to dart all over the place, and inevitably it will. If you want to try and do the full reverse plank with that, well, it's very difficult to keep the ball in play there, and be prepared for wobbles aplenty if you're trying that one. And I think with that idea, sometimes you go to a full plank and then remove the hand, so you're kind of in a prep position. But if you want to try the forwards and backwards movement with the hands free, well, it's probably the top end level of that bridging technique. So good challenging exercise, good fun exercise, and if you can get to an Adductor Magnus bridge no-handed with a roll out and back on a Swiss ball, I'd say your posterior chain, your hamstrings, your adductors are doing pretty well at that point. And it's a good little fun drill to bring in. So there's the second exercise in the strength series.